Alien Romulus, going back to the roots of suspense horror and claustrophobia. And I enjoyed it, I genuinely did, but I do have a few issues with it. But before I get into them, I do just want to say that I'll be keeping this video spoiler free until nearer the end, where I'll do a little spoiler section. So firstly, this movie is set between Alien and aliens, and sees a group of people enter an abandoned space station where they encounter the dreaded xenomorph, and they try their very best to not be killed to death. Yes, it's essentially the same setup as Alien Isolation, even with it being set between the first two movies. God, I love that game. Let's break it down to what works and what doesn't work. What this movie excels at is being a visual homage to the original Alien. When they get onto the station, the equipment they use looks and sounds just like the tech they had in that first film. And with a very nice soundtrack, which again is a love letter to the original Alien, so it's a massive nostalgia trip. I also gotta mention the xenomorph. Back with a guy in a suit, and it looks great. These are easily the best looking xenomorphs yet. With minimal CGI, it's old school and I love that. When the xenomorphs are on screen, that is where the movie shines for me. The xenomorphs look great, sound great, and when they kill there are some really bloody violent deaths, all of which are entirely necessary for creating a good Alien movie. None of it comes off as gratuitous violence. And how can I talk about the xenomorphs without mentioning the facehuggers? There are facehuggers aplenty in this movie, and they are as creepy as ever. There's one scene in particular I want to mention. One of the characters gets facehuggered, but they come up with a really good plan to free them. They freeze the facehugger's tail and then use a stun baton to electrify it, and because the tail's frozen, it doesn't spasm and just break her neck or anything, and they can remove the facehugger safely. And when they pull it off of her, it was kinda gross, seeing its xenomorph baby pumper, let's call it, being pulled out of her throat. It was good, it was cool, but it was a little gross. When they said they were going back to the franchise's suspense roots, I immediately knew it was going to be less action focused than, say, Aliens. But rest assured, there is still action in this film, but it's used sparingly, with I think the perfect amount of it. They even have pulse rifles, which again is another blast of nostalgia. What I do absolutely love about this movie is that the alien acid blood is more of a focus. It always seemed to me that since the original, it became kind of an afterthought. In Romulus though, they have the pulse rifles, but they're hesitant to actually fire them until one of the characters comes up with a way to get around the problem that they have. And it was really cool and interesting, something we haven't seen in an Alien movie before, but I'll talk about it a bit more in the spoiler section. And the reason why they were hesitant to use the guns is because it would make the aliens bleed a mass amount of blood. And they are on a space station, so if they start shedding a load of acid blood, it's going to burn through the hull and then they're going to have problems. So they have to think of a way around that. Which is something I feel that the other movies didn't really think about too much. Okay, sure, I can give Aliens a pass because it was set on a planet, so it didn't really matter if they bled or not. But it sure as hell did in Resurrection. So the way they handled the action in this film and the acid blood was really good and in just the right volume. Now, let's talk about the characters and the acting, and this is where I'm a little mixed on it. Let's get the acting out of the way. I thought it was solid. There really wasn't a bad performance, nothing felt phoned in or awkward, it was just a well acted movie. The characters though. We have the two leading characters, Rain, played by Kaylee Spaney, and Andy, played by David Johnson. They were both decent characters, but I think if pushed, I would say I liked Andy the most, but I can't really say why until I get to the spoiler section later on. Note that I said decent. They aren't brilliantly written characters, they are interesting enough, but they could have been a little bit more engaging. The rest of the characters though, I found them dull, two-dimensional, and a lot of them were there just to up the body count. There was one character that showed up, or maybe I should say a version of this classic character that made an appearance. I won't say who until the spoiler section later on, but I will say that it was a nice addition. So yeah, the characters, I'm mixed on it. Some work, some are just a bit boring, which doesn't help make us as the audience root for them. Therefore, ultimately, we don't care if they live or they die, big factor in a horror film that a lot of movies seem to miss. We need to care about the characters, or it doesn't matter to us. Thankfully, the film made up for this in other ways, but it's by far not my biggest issue with Romulus. Obviously, going back to the roots of the franchise means an emphasis on suspense, and I do not think it handled the suspense particularly well. A big reason why the suspense worked in Alien was we had no idea what the xenomorph was. It was new to us. In Romulus, of course we know what the xenomorph is. We know what the facehuggers are. We know all of it. So there is no way the movie can rely on fear of the unknown being a factor in building the suspense. So they have to go old school, building up the anticipation and the fear of a jump scare, not knowing when a facehugger's going to jump out of the dark at you. Or that noise over there, is it a pipe settling? Or is that a xenomorph crawling along it? That is the movie's only real shot for building suspense, and I do not think it hit the target. The scares are predictable, which as a result means the suspense falls flat. One scene in particular involves the facehuggers, creepy little buggers that they are. The movie explains that they hunt by sound and body heat, which is cool to know, and I don't know whether there's a bit of expanded lore, a comic or something that explains that, or they just came up with that themselves here. Either way, it works. There's a room full of the facehuggers, and obviously they need to pass through it. So they crank up the heating to the exact same temperature as the human body, which means they cannot hone in on their body heat. Which means it's sneaking time! An admittedly cool concept, but one that's been done much better in movies like A Quiet Place. And to be honest, it really didn't get given enough time to shine here. This could have been ground zero for suspense, but they wasted the opportunity. Especially when one of the characters in that room starts talking over the radio. Okay, sure, he's whispering, but even then, it just immediately killed the scene for me. Okay, so the suspense could have been better, but it's still not my biggest issue with the movie. There is something that happens in the final act, and I can't say what it is without spoiling it, so all I'll say is I did not like what they did at the end of this movie, and it was a big factor in dropping the score for me. Speaking of said score, I will go into the final verdict for the movie and then talk spoilers. Overall, I will give Alien Romulus a 7 out of 10. It does get a lot right, and it is worth seeing if you are a fan of the Alien movies. Just don't go into it expecting a lot of really good suspense or truly engaging characters. Go for the visuals, the sound effects, and the xenomorphs. Alright, spoiler time! If you haven't seen it and don't want it spoiling, like and subscribe and leave now. Let's start with why I liked Andy the most. He initially seems to have an awkward personality, but then it's revealed that he is an android, that he's damaged, and his friend Rain is keeping him going. I loved that. It helped create a unique friendship between the two. And the reason I liked him more is because they could do things with him being an android that they couldn't do with Rain. They uploaded a chip to his CPU, or whatever you want to call it, and this helped repair him, but gave him a newer, more Weyland-Yutani focused primary directive. His old directive was to look after Rain and do whatever was in her best interests. His newer one was to do whatever was best for the company, which made him colder and more calculating. Rain eventually switches him back, but it made for a fun dynamic. I think it's the relationship that those two had that made them really the only interesting characters in this film. Next up is a familiar face, sort of returns. Ian Holm played Ash in the original Alien, and he was an android that would do whatever he could to serve the company. And he returns as a facial and vocal reference for a new android named Rook. This android, from the moment we met him, is very badly damaged, having been torn apart from the waist down. Because when our little gang board the space station, it's already overrun by xenomorphs. Rook was essentially Ash, clearly the same model of android, just named differently, but he had the exact same directive. And again, this was another big nostalgia hit. He even said his famous line,
"I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies."
And I like how they created Rook. The performance was that of actor Daniel Betts, but used Holm as the reference. The end result didn't look like a realistic young Ian Holm, but the brilliant thing here is it didn't need to. It could look like an unrealistic de-aging attempt. Because he was a badly damaged android, and after being damaged, they do tend to look a little less human. Now, before I get into my biggest issue with the movie, I do just want to talk about the overall plot. I have already said it's about a small group of friends who board an abandoned xenomorph-riddled space station, but the reason they do it is because they work in a mine on a Weyland-Yutani colony and keep getting cheated out of rightfully being able to leave. So they spot this station and take a small ship and board it before anyone else can, in the hopes of stealing some cryopods so they can make a long journey to some utopia planet. And they were so optimistic about it, but they had a really horrible time of it. As far as a story setup goes, it works. It was decent. And the reason that this space station was overrun is because this particular station was out there looking for the corpse of the OG xenomorph that Ripley so harshly kicked out of the airlock in the first movie. How dare you treat a perfect organism like that? So they found it and took samples. And they used those samples to create more xenomorphs and facehuggers, and yeah, it was a bad idea, it really did not go their way. Also, they could synthesize this MacGuffin serum that would better humanity, which is all Weyland-Yutani ever wanted. I mean, obviously they're going to patent it and become insanely rich, but hey, they want to build better worlds. I mean, I'd rather work for Weyland-Yutani than Umbrella. At least you get to go to space before you die. So they managed to successfully create this serum, and they've got all of these living xenomorphs and facehuggers flat packed away. Seriously, they're in vacuum sealed bags, it's hilarious. Why keep them once you've created the serum? Why not just dispose of them? I guess to create more of this stuff, but even so, it's a bad idea. They do explain that it takes 6 months to send a signal to other stations or ships, but get that one piece of serum which you created from the OG xenomorph, which we do see the body of, by the way. So I guess that counts as another classic cameo. Then wait until the 6 months is up and create more of it in a secure environment. They were sloppy, greedy and impatient. I know I've used this clip before, but take it away, Jurassic World.
These people never learn.
Now for the big one. Remember how in Alien Resurrection they did the whole human xenomorph hybrid? And it was a monstrosity, but not even in a good way. They pull the same crap here. So what little of our merry little band is left manages to escape the station, which is Rain, Andy and their pregnant friend Kay, who was captured by the xenomorph for quite a bit of time, but they didn't see a dead facehugger near her, so they just assumed she hadn't been impregnated by one. But maybe she has? And they are getting ready for cryosleep, and it looks like they are safe and sound. Naturally, there is no way they can end the movie there, despite having an action-packed scene in an elevator shaft involving the xenomorphs minutes earlier. They have to do the thing that almost all Alien movies do when you think they have escaped. She starts giving birth, but it's not a human baby, it's an alien hybrid. The birth scene itself was horrendous, and the design of the hybrid does look better than the one in Resurrection, but I still don't like it. And it ends with the hybrid being kicked off into space again, only this time Rain and the hybrid are hanging on a rope trying to climb back into the ship. There's explosions, screaming, and it's quite chaotic. Visually speaking, it does look quite nice, but God knows why they had to do the alien-human hybrid again. Okay, yes, sure, it looks better than the one in Resurrection, so well done, you did better than the excessively low bar that movie set. We come to these movies to watch the xenomorphs, the facehuggers, maybe you can create some new variation of the xenomorph, but stay well away from a human-alien hybrid. Once in the franchise was enough. It didn't add anything to the movie, and to be honest, it comes across that the only reason they did it is because they needed something to add in a surprise attack at the end. Even though you see that surprise attack coming a mile away, you just don't know what form it's going to take. Although thinking about it, the fact that that woman was pregnant was probably a red flag that they were going to do the hybrid. Maybe I was just being blindly optimistic that they wouldn't. Perhaps I'm in a minority with this one and everyone else loves the hybrid, but I don't think it was needed and it lowered the score for me. I was enjoying this film throughout at an 8 out of 10 until that ending came along, which dropped it to a 7. Okay, so I didn't like the way Romulus ended, but let's end the review on a positive note. I mentioned there was a scene where they do something clever with the aliens' acid blood. They were hesitant to fire their guns because they didn't want the acid blood to burn through the hull, which makes sense, but when they entered the station it was stuck on something called a gravity purge loop, where essentially the gravity generators would go off and on every few minutes. Rain re-enabled that and then shot up all the aliens in zero gravity. It looked really cool, so all of the acid blood was just floating there rather than burning through the hull. Then she had to maneuver away through this corridor with all of the acid blood just floating there, and as far as alien acid blood scenes go, it was original and really well executed. Of course then the gravity came back on and it burnt through the hull, which is when everything started breaking down and going crazy. So once she decided to shoot them, she knew she was on a timer to escape. It was such a great scene, definitely my favourite part of the movie. So yeah, just to reiterate, I would recommend going out to see this while it's in the cinemas, theatres, pictures, whatever you want to call it. It's a fun, nostalgia-fueled ride for the most part. You've been watching Good or Bad, and if you've enjoyed today's video, please go ahead and hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you next time.